A wealthy businessman strolls through a high-end art gallery, his sharp suit and confident smirk making it clear. He thinks he owns the room. His eyes scan the paintings with mild interest, nodding at a few, before stopping in front of one. He tilts his head, then lets out a laugh. "You really think this is worth anything?" he scoffs, turning to the artist standing beside it, a black woman, poised, proud, and full of quiet determination. She doesn't flinch. "Yes, I do." He smirks, looking around as if waiting for others to agree with his mockery. "This? It's amateur work. No real collector would waste their money on this." His voice carries through the gallery, loud enough for guests to hear. A few onlookers chuckle. Others shift uncomfortably. But she doesn't back down. He thinks he's won, but what happens next? He never saw it coming. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from. Have you ever seen someone underestimated just because of who they are? This woman wasn't just any artist, and by the time the night was over, she would leave him speechless. The woman doesn't flinch. She meets his smug expression with quiet confidence. His words hang in the air, but she refuses to let them shake her. She has been here before, underestimated, dismissed, looked down upon. But not tonight. Tonight is different. She stands tall, brushing off his insult as the gallery buzzes around her. She had been waiting for this night for months. The gallery was one of the most prestigious in the city, a place where collectors, critics, and art lovers gathered to admire the best of the best. To even have a piece displayed here was an achievement. But she had more than just one piece. Her work, raw, emotional, and deeply personal, filled an entire section of the gallery. Each painting told a story. Stories of struggle, resilience, hope. It had taken her years to get here. The long nights, the self-doubt, the rejections, the constant battle to be taken seriously in a world that favored status over skill. And now, she was here, standing beside her paintings, watching as guests admired her work. Some whispered in appreciation. A few nodded, clearly impressed. Others took photos, capturing the beauty and depth of her art. She should have felt proud. But deep down, there was a flicker of uncertainty. Would anyone actually buy her work? Would they see her talent? Or would they see what so many had before, just another unknown name? She took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. No matter what happened tonight, she belonged here. Then he walked in. A man with a powerful presence, tailored suit, polished shoes, and an arrogance that filled the room before he even spoke. He moved through the gallery like he owned it. Eyes scanning paintings with a trained but judgmental gaze, nodding approvingly at pieces by well-known artists, while barely acknowledging anything else. He was exactly the type of collector who only cared about big names and big prices. Not passion, not meaning, just money. She watched as he made his way through the room, shaking hands, exchanging knowing glances with other collectors. They respected him, because he was wealthy, powerful, important. And then his eyes landed on her paintings. He stopped, stared, tilted his head slightly as if trying to figure out what he was looking at. Then, without hesitation, he laughed, loud enough that nearby guests turned their heads. She clenched her jaw but stayed composed. "You really think this is worth anything?" His voice dripped with amusement. She turned to face him fully, standing her ground. "Yes, I do." He smirked, glancing around as if waiting for others to agree with his mockery. "This? It's amateur work. No real collector would waste their money on this." A few people chuckled. Others avoided eye contact, pretending they hadn't heard. Some shifted uncomfortably, watching to see how she would respond. She inhaled slowly. This wasn't the first time she'd been doubted, but it would be the last. He smirked. I bet you won't sell a single piece tonight." She didn't blink, didn't falter. Instead, she smiled. A small, knowing smile. We'll see. Because what was about to happen next? He would never forget it. Her smile remained steady, unshaken by his arrogance. The businessman, however, only saw it as naive confidence. He smirked, stepping closer to the painting in front of him, hands in his pockets. He tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing it. Then, without hesitation, he scoffed. "This?" He let out a short laugh. "This is amateur work." A few guests turned their heads, some out of curiosity, others because they smelled conflict brewing. She didn't react. She had heard worse before. But that didn't mean it didn't sting. The businessman gestured toward the canvas with a flick of his wrist. "Real art comes from real artists. This?" He shook his head. "It's nothing." Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. She took a slow breath, keeping her voice measured. "Art isn't just about fame or price tags. It's about emotion, expression." He cut her off with a laugh, waving his hand dismissively. Spoken like someone who has never sold a piece in her life. A couple of nearby guests chuckled. Others didn't laugh, but they also didn't speak up. Because he was rich, powerful, respected, and in rooms like these, money often defined the truth. More guests had gathered now. Some sipped their wine, watching the exchange like a spectacle. The artist could feel their stares, some amused, some pitying. One woman whispered to her friend, "He's not wrong." No one's bidding on her work. Another man, adjusting his expensive cufflinks, murmured, "I mean, I like the colors, but let's be real. Who's paying top dollar for this?" She clenched her jaw. Not because she was angry, but because she had expected this. She had fought her way into this gallery, into this world of polished suits and generational wealth. But no matter how good her art was, people like him would always see her as an outsider. The businessman turned back to her, smirking. "You'll never sell a piece with that attitude." She finally let out a breath, forcing herself to stay calm, composed, in control. What attitude would that be? He grinned, thinking talent is enough. She arched a brow. "And what do you think is enough?" His smirk widened. "Connections, status, a name people recognize." He gestured toward another section of the gallery. "Take these paintings. Signed by big names, they'll sell for thousands tonight. Yours?" He let out a short laugh. "I bet you won't sell a single piece." Some guests laughed softly. Others just watched, waiting for her reaction. But instead of shrinking, instead of defending herself again, she smiled. A small, knowing smile. We'll see. Because what was about to happen next? He never saw it coming. The businessman's chuckle echoed in the room, filled with the confidence of a man who had never been proven wrong. He took a slow sip of his wine, then shook his head, amused. "We'll see?" he repeated, his tone mocking. That's the kind of optimism that keeps starving artists in business for exactly 1 year before they realize how the real world works. She remained quiet, her expression unreadable. "But I admire your spirit," he continued, voice dripping with condescension. "Takes guts to stand by something no one values." The artist didn't move. She didn't need to. Because the tables were about to turn, and he would never see it coming. The atmosphere in the gallery was shifting, subtly but surely. More guests had gathered around, sensing something important unfolding. Even those who had dismissed her work earlier were now lingering, curious. Then, a new presence entered the scene. A man, well-dressed but without the ostentatious air of the wealthy buyers around him, approached the painting the businessman had mocked. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, scanned the artwork as if peeling back every layer. There was something about his focus, the way he really looked. And suddenly, the mood in the room shifted entirely. The businessman was the first to recognize him. Victor Langston, a name that carried weight. One of the most influential art critics in the country. His reviews dictated what was valuable, what was worthy. A single endorsement from him could elevate an artist overnight. And here he was, standing in front of the very painting that had just been mocked. The businessman's smirk faltered, just slightly. Then, glancing at the artist, he muttered, "Good luck convincing him." Real critics only recognize real talent, but she didn't need to convince him, because he was already captivated. The critic studied the painting with intensity, tilting his head slightly as if deciphering a hidden language. The room grew silent. People watched, waited. Even those who had been on the businessman's side moments ago held their breath. Victor Langston didn't speak for a long time. He simply absorbed. Then finally, he exhaled. And when he did, his voice was filled with reverence. "This," he said, stepping back just slightly, as if seeing the painting in a new light, "is a masterpiece." The businessman's smirk froze. The word rang through the gallery like a thunderclap. The guests who had been skeptical, the ones who had laughed along with him, they weren't laughing anymore. A woman near the front gasped softly. A few others whispered among themselves, suddenly reevaluating the piece in front of them. The artist remained still, her face calm. She had known. But now, everyone else knew too. Victor Langston nodded to himself as if confirming something in his mind. He turned to the gallery curator standing nearby. "How has her work not sold out yet?" The businessman stiffened. The curator, flustered, stammered, Well, we've had some interest, but—" Langston raised a hand, cutting him off. "Then let me start." He turned to the artist, meeting her gaze. "I'll take this one, for triple the asking price." The businessman blinked. His brain struggled to process what had just happened. This question mark. This wasn't real. This was a joke. It had to be. "This," he gestured toward the painting, forcing out a laugh. You must be joking." But Victor Langston wasn't, and neither were the other buyers who suddenly stepped forward. "I'd like to see more of her work," one woman said, voice filled with genuine interest. "Are all her pieces available?" another man asked, now eager to claim one before they were gone. The businessman felt a wave of unease. He had spent the entire night convincing himself and everyone else that her work was worthless. And now, people were lining up to own a piece of it. His confidence, the foundation of his arrogance, wavered. His voice was quieter now, less certain. This can't be real. But it was. And for the first time, he was the one being ignored. The artist met his gaze, her expression unwavering. For so long he had spoken down to her, doubted her, mocked her. But now, he had nothing left to say. The crowd no longer saw her as just another artist. She was someone they wanted to invest in. She had earned her place. And he was just another man who had been proven wrong. She tilted her head slightly, watching the realization settle into his face. Then, in a voice calm and steady, she said, "Looks like you were wrong." And this time, he didn't argue. The businessman's smirk had completely disappeared. His confidence, so strong moments ago, now wavered as Victor Langston's words rang through the room like a gunshot. "I'll take this one, for triple the price." A hush fell over the gallery. For the first time that night, people were seeing her differently. It started as a shift, a small tilt in the air, like the first signs of an oncoming storm. The wealthy guests, once detached and uninterested, were suddenly paying attention. And then, like an avalanche, it began. A woman in a floor-length silk gown, who had earlier strolled past the artist's work without a second glance, suddenly stepped forward. She examined the painting Victor Langston had just claimed, her brow furrowing with newfound intrigue. "If Victor Langston sees value in this," she murmured half to herself, "then perhaps I should too." She turned toward the curator, tapping her manicured fingers against her wine glass. "I'd like to place an offer on another piece." Another guest followed, then another. A man in a deep blue suit adjusted his cufflinks, glancing between the artist's remaining paintings. His voice was careful, but urgent. "Are all her pieces still available?" The curator, still processing what was happening, hesitated. But before he could answer, another guest cut in. "I'll take that one." "No, I will. I want one before they're all gone." And just like that, the room flipped. The businessman's stomach dropped. He stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. The very people who had laughed along with him, who had nodded in agreement when he had mocked her work, they were now fighting to buy it. This wasn't just a sale. This was a complete reversal of power. His face twitched as he turned toward one of the buyers, a man he knew personally, someone who had always trusted his taste. "You're actually buying this?" he scoffed, forcing out a chuckle. "Come on, you can't be serious. You were just telling me how—" The man didn't even let him finish. "If Langston says it's a masterpiece," he said smoothly, "that's all I need to know." The businessman's breath caught in his throat. No, this couldn't be happening. For years, he had been the one people turned to for artistic judgment. His word had influenced auctions, swayed buyers, controlled markets. But now, no one was listening to him. His power, his credibility, his influence, it was slipping through his fingers. More guests rushed forward, wallets out, eyes gleaming with urgency. "I'll pay double," one woman declared. Another man snapped his fingers at the curator. "No, triple." A collector from Paris, who had originally dismissed the artist's work as decent, suddenly seemed panicked. "I need one," he muttered to himself, "before they're all gone." The curator, scrambling, tried to keep up. We have a bidding process." "Forget that," a buyer interrupted. "I'll buy it outright." The artist remained silent, watching the moment unfold. She had waited for this. Not just the sales, not just the success, but the validation. She had never been the problem. It was the world around her, the bias, the dismissal, the refusal to see her worth until someone else gave them permission. But now, they saw her, and there was no turning back. The businessman clenched his jaw, forcing out a tight laugh. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed, looking around for someone, anyone, who would agree with him. He gestured toward her paintings. "You people are acting like these are museum-worthy pieces. Just minutes ago, nobody cared about." But his words fell flat. No one was listening. They were too busy buying. He turned toward Langston, frustration bubbling beneath his carefully polished demeanor. "This can't be real," he muttered, his voice lower now, weaker. "You're really endorsing this? This is what you're calling a masterpiece?" Langston finally turned to him, his expression calm, unreadable. "You'll understand in a few years," he said simply. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. The businessman felt his face burn. It had taken one sentence to make him look like a fool, and the worst part? It had been so easy. The artist, still composed, finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and deliberate. She turned to Langston first, giving him a small nod. "Thank you." Then she turned to the businessman. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. The entire night had been leading to this. She met his gaze, holding it without a hint of fear. And then, with absolute certainty, she said, "Looks like you were wrong." The businessman's fingers twitched. His jaw clenched. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Because she was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The curator walked over, clearing his throat. His voice brimmed with satisfaction. "Well," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, "it appears that all of her pieces have now sold." The applause started small. Then it spread. Guests clapped, some nodding with admiration, others smiling as if they had just witnessed history. The businessman, he just stood there, frozen, watching as the very woman he had mocked outshined him in front of everyone. The artist gave him one last glance. She wasn't gloating. She didn't need to. Her success spoke for itself. She had proven him wrong without lowering herself to his level. And that was the biggest victory of all. She turned, walking toward the buyers, shaking hands, soaking in her well-earned moment. And the businessman? He stood in stunned silence. No one cared what he thought anymore. And for a man like him, that was a worse defeat than any amount of money could ever fix. The businessman stood frozen. His eyes darted across the gallery, watching as people celebrated the artist's success. He could still hear the applause ringing in his ears, drowning out the echoes of his own arrogance. Moments ago, he had been the center of attention. People had laughed with him, nodded at his words, followed his lead. Now, he was nothing more than a spectator, a forgotten man in a room that had moved on without him. The businessman's fingers tightened around his empty wine glass. His posture, once so proud and commanding, had subtly changed. His shoulders weren't as square, his stance not as firm. He tried to find something to say, a way to regain control, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? That Victor Langston was wrong? That all the wealthy collectors now bidding thousands on her work had suddenly lost their taste in art? Number, because the truth was undeniable. The artist had won, and he had made a fool of himself. The artist turned toward him, not with anger, not with arrogance, just quiet certainty. She met his eyes, her voice even, unwavering. "You don't have to respect me," she said simply. She took a step closer, not to threaten, not to intimidate, but to make sure he would never forget this moment. "But you will respect my talent." The businessman's breath hitched, not because of what she had said, but because of how true it was, and because, for the first time, he had nothing to say in return. The businessman let out a slow breath, forcing a smirk onto his face, a last-ditch effort to act like he was unbothered. But it was weak, hollow. "Well," he muttered, adjusting his jacket, "I suppose even broken clocks are right twice a day. It was supposed to be an insult." But even he didn't believe it. No one laughed, no one reacted, no one cared. He cleared his throat, pretending to check his watch as if he suddenly had somewhere more important to be. And then he turned and walked away. The artist exhaled, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Not just the sales, not just the money, but the proof. The proof that talent is talent, that art isn't validated by wealth or privilege, that the world had tried to shut her out, overlook her, dismiss her, and yet, here she was, winning. She closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them and took it all in. A woman in a black gown, a respected collector, stepped forward with a small smile. That was quite the show. The artist turned to her. "You mean the art?" The woman smirked. That too. Nearby, the teenage assistant from earlier, who had been watching the entire time, grinned as he scrolled through his phone. "I think this moment just went viral," he whispered to another gallery worker. "People online are gonna love this." And they would. Because this wasn't just a sale. This was a moment that people would remember. The businessman reached the door. He hesitated. A part of him wanted to turn back, to say something, to regain even an ounce of the control he had lost. But he knew there was no winning this. The best thing he could do, the only thing he could do, was leave. So he did. He pushed through the gallery doors and stepped outside, disappearing into the night. And just like that, he was gone. The artist turned back to her work. Buyers were still lining up to make purchases, eager to take home a piece of what they now recognized as genius. But she wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about the moment that proved that talent wasn't decided in boardrooms, auction houses, or the wallets of wealthy men. Talent was undeniable. And no amount of arrogance, privilege, or dismissal could take that away from her. She had won, and she had done it without lowering herself. That was the real victory. As the artist stood among the buyers, collectors, and admirers, she took one last look toward the door where the businessman had exited. He was gone. But the impact of this night, that would stay forever. This wasn't just about selling paintings. It was about proving that talent isn't about wealth or status. It's about passion, perseverance, and belief in yourself, even when others don't. For years, she had been underestimated, dismissed, told that her art wasn't valuable. But tonight, she didn't just prove them wrong. She proved herself right. And that's something no amount of money or privilege could ever take away. Have you ever been underestimated? How did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how you turned the tables and showed the world what you're truly capable of. If this story inspired you, hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories that deserve to be heard. Because everyone has a moment where they prove their worth. And when that moment comes, make sure the world is watching. Until next time, believe in yourself, stand tall, and never let anyone define your worth.